Okay, I think we're up and running. So welcome, and I'm sad to say this is our last session of this study, and I really hope that this has served its purpose, which is really, of course, to enable us all to connect with this particular teaching, and appreciates its profundity. The presumption is here that there's a little bit of sense that, as you have seen in the last session, that this is very much for experienced meditators, and I'm sure all of you are experienced meditators. So it's only fair that all of you have the exposure to these teachings. This is from somebody who cares for us and who knows what we're doing. And even though this is what, I think it's 11th century. I actually just was looking at Padampa Sangye's biography. It's called Padampa Sangye, Line of Siddhas, and it's translated by Mokitov, together with a great Nepali practitioner of Chud, you could say in the lineage of Padampa Sangye, called, what's his name? Sitting Wangchuk or something like that. And you could say someone who truly has Sitting Wangdu Rinpoche. I think he's still alive, but one of these larger-than-life persons who you could say has walked the talk and upholds Padampa Sangye's lineage. So the work is called Padampa Sangye, Line of Siddhas. So if you hear some, and it's published by Snowline, if you hear a little bit of activity around me, it's because I'm here with some lively people, so that's good. Anyway, we left off with stanza 80, and that's not quite where I want it to be. Even though it's nice to revisit Tingri. So, here we are. All right. So, although we could say this might not apply to some of us, in case we don't perceive ourselves as young anymore, it is really we're still capable, we still have some strength and some miles left. So this very much applies to everyone here. All right. It says, while you are young, practice hard and with austerities. People of Tingri, once you're old, your constitution won't withstand it. So when we're young, we have the strength and faculties for study and practice. The stability acquired in youth will enable Dharma to flourish in old age. Make use of your present strength, so later there are no regrets. Now, Dharma, as we all know, is not just signing up and then outside powers are going to look after us. This is a process of education, and it's a process of application. And as you know, the practitioners who succeeded, they didn't necessarily, you could say, practice asceticism, but they did also practice with a disregard for comfort. So this is what we can say with austerities. And it really doesn't consist of well, it does consist of putting up with discomfort. But it doesn't mean, you know, self-denial, all of that. In terms of our situation, it really means that we make Dharma a priority and give it, you could say, everything we have. So in that way, you could say, practicing hard and getting up to speed, that's something that requires being proactive. And this applies then to studying and analyzing this, you could say, the greatest of all sciences, which is reality, especially understanding our subjectivity, our consciousness that is the primary agent. So we're particular, actually, us who come from the modern culture, because this kind of, you could say, practice, well, knowledge for one is an unknown in this culture, and as a result also the practice of it. So you could say we, just in terms of study, we need to apply ourselves more. We need to engage more with the actual studies, critical thinking, in order for us to, what we call, for our mind to turn to the Dharma. And when we're young, or rather where we are right now, with the strength we have, it's really time to learn exactly what it means to meditate and to clarify confusion. Otherwise, being old, tired, and more illnesses creep in, then our faculties become weakened, and it's difficult to acquire certainty then in the view and stability in the practice. We need to have some habituation when we get there. So we should make use of this present strength, apply ourselves wholeheartedly, and be able to then eventually pass on with no regret. This is being very practical. This is not exactly polite dinner talk. I think one of my friends said it's not polite dinner music, but this is really a reflection that is not common to our, you could say, ordinary outlook, and it's at the same time it is something this is essential. What we have now, because in the previous section we very much had a series of instructions on meditation. What we have more is a lot of advice that's helpful, like the one we just saw. Then again, coming back to what we have looked at previously, when emotions arise, bring antidotes to bear on them. This is Sloka 82. People of Tingri, let free all concepts in their very nature. Recognizing the havoc kleshas wreak, it is time we defeat them. A good practitioner is not affected by circumstances, neither good nor bad. Particularly good practitioners are free from duality. They see their nature as the innate unity of emptiness and wisdom. So when we say duality, we mean appearance and emptiness, or self and other. These, you could say, constructs that we fixate on. And we do so with a recognition that our mind has nothing objectifiable, nothing tangible about it, and yet also it is endowed with this luminous quality of knowing, wisdom. So if we look at the destructive emotions, our neurosis, like anger, we can see how they destroy our happiness. As we live with these kleshas 24/7, we actually need to be expert at dealing with them in every micro moment. Khyentse give the metaphors of them as being as thieves or illness. We need this constant vigilance or introspection, knowing what's happening in our mind. And having that continually then is the mark of a sincere practitioner. Kyabje Dilgo Khyentse, he says then, You may know how to practice when everything is going well, but that is of little use if you succumb to the first emotion that hits you. End of quote. We can see what is a great practitioner by the way they handle their circumstances, bad as well as good. Again, in the Vajrayana, they say that it's relatively easy to recognize and bring onto the path negative circumstances. It's much more tricky, actually, when things are going well. So for someone truly wise, someone who has genuine experience, realization, then the notion of self versus other, these notions are seen as transparent. And so such practitioners are not caught by insecurity and alienation. When arisings happen in their mind, or they're caught in duality, then through recognizing it's just like a snake freeing itself of a knot on its body. It's effortless. So an experienced practitioner sees this nature and know that their own untainted pure awareness is free from anything that can be grasped, or what Khyentse Rinpoche then refers to as emptiness inseparable from transcendent wisdom. '83. Think from time to time of all the defects of samsara. People of Tingri, that will make your faith become much clearer. When there is dissatisfaction with practice, reflect on the misery of samsara. Such realization will revive faith and reaffirm the value of the teachings. So inevitably, on the path, we're going to have moments of being, you could say, down about our practice, depressed, discouraged, and so forth. Or just, you could say, circumstances in general. And this we shouldn't resent. As practitioners, we abide by this sense that if we can't change it, there's no need to worry. If we can change it, then there's also no need for worry. So, as such, when we have these circumstances, we should rather see them as an expression of the truth, the fact that samsara is painful. And with that, we reaffirm our commitment to the view and to our practice. '84. Right now, develop diligence and stand your ground. People of Tingri, when you die, it will guide you on the path. So as a well-prepared head of a powerful army, a meditator faces death with calm. We want to prepare now with the aid of an experienced guide, the teacher. So we can imagine a confident general who is at the head of a powerful army, possessing all the necessary weapons, ammunitions, and so forth, and having all the conditions on his side. He'll remain calm then as the battle looms. So similarly, a practitioner of meditation is not caught by fear as death approaches. So just as we would prepare for a journey, gathering clothes, money, travel documents, we now have to prepare the long journey of future lives. And we do that by taking advice from an experienced traveler, which is then our teacher. Our teacher, we haven't seen our teacher die, but the scope of the teacher's realization is this common ground that we share with the teacher, which is the space of reality, the Dharmata. And so the teacher has seen what reality is and seen this common ground of reality that we also possess. And so guiding us in recognizing this nature, the teacher is able to distinguish what is confusion and what is reality. And in this way, we listen to the teacher and we are then equipped for this further journey. 85. If you're not free now, when will you ever get to be free? People of Tingri, your chance to eat comes only one time in 100. Not knowing better, we are often preoccupied with short-sighted concerns. We must recognize this exceptional opportunity and not waste time. We should reflect about where we are and what we can do. Why would we let this present opportunity pass? So Kyabje Dilgo Khyentse, he says, people often say, I would love to practice the Dharma, but for the moment it's impossible. First, I must take care of my family and provide for their future. So this kind of attitude is something that happens everywhere. Sometimes it's about the family, sometimes it's about career, sometimes it's about all sorts of different circumstances. But we have no warning when the time has come. And so regardless of what we're doing, we need to apply the Dharma right now. In fact, actually, we can see much more in the context of modern life how we actually are seduced by these superficial concerns, particularly because in our culture there's not really any encouragement of anything beyond this life. There's no notion of enlightenment or no notion of the possibility of doing something constructive with our consciousness, particularly then in view of future lives. But then again, if we presently have this more informed perspective, and if we reflect, we see what needs to be done, not just for ourselves, but for those we love and for the world at large. So we shouldn't procrastinate. We should rather reflect. We have the exceptional conditions of a human existence. We have heard the Dharma. We're able to follow it. So why on earth should we put off the practice of Dharma? When will you have a similar opportunity? Rinpoche says, if you allow the months and years to slip by, the opportunity to free yourself from the vicious circle of samsara will be wasted. And he goes on, when a delicious feast is offered to you, take it while you can. The clock of Dharma has struck noon. Seize the chance before it passes. 86. Life is so ephemeral, like the dew on the grass. People of Tingri don't yield to laziness and indifference. Life is short. We need to practice now. We mustn't be passive or give in to circumstances. We need to acquire immutable stability. We must see the immense value of these words. So here Rinpoche says, life is fragile, like a dewdrop poised on the tip of a blade of grass, ready to be carried away by the first breath of morning breeze. It is not enough just to have a sincere desire to practice the Dharma and the intention to begin soon. Do not just passively wait for the wind of death to carry away your plans before you have got around to them. As soon as the idea of practicing comes to you, do it without hesitation. End of quote. We need to be clear on this perspective. It makes all the difference. And we look at the great sages of the past and how they gained their greatness on the basis of recognizing this single point, that life is fragile and the need to practice right this very moment. Thing, of course, is, as beginners, we do get caught by our thoughts, by our ensuing emotions, and consequently by our habitual patterns. We are swayed by our circumstances just like long mountain grass bending in the wind. So, with that recognition in mind then, we need to apply ourselves to acquire stability, to become stable and sturdy like the mountain itself. So such instruction, simple as it sounds, is like the lion's roar of truth. So this is where we mustn't be jaded and just treat this as information. There's absolutely no rocket science in this. Nobody will be impressed with any of us if we go out and proclaim, our life is impermanent and we should seize the day. Like, people will say, yeah, that's pretty obvious. But the point here is that we have such a vast perspective in relation to these apparent cliches. So that's where, when these apparent cliches come from the mouths of siddhas, as it does, then we should really take these to heart. So for that purpose, when we hear this, we need to have an open heart. We need to let our heart be touched by these words of instruction, and we need to have the wisdom and the courage to carry through. From 87, from where you are now, should you lose your footing, people of Tingri, it will be hard to find a human life again. The greatest danger is falling into the lower realms. We need to get to the bottom of what creates these realms. We need the path of Dharma to effectively achieve that. So just like a rock climber, we are permanently positioned in danger of slipping and falling into the abyss. The thing about a rock climber is that he or her actually can only lose this life. However, falling into rebirth in the lower realms, we experience intensely negative cycles that perpetuate themselves. So as a consequence, these rebirths, they last very long. So when we talk about lower realms, it's very different from where we are right now, because of course we can go through the 6 realms in the course of one day. We have all these various styles of neurosis that you could say are the seeds of the 6 realms, but we are still anchored in the human realm. And so our circumstances are somewhat benevolent. It's very different when we actually take rebirth, where the environment reflects the particular negative, you could say, attitudes, such as poverty, hatred, and stupidity. These are what we call the lower realms. And particularly the hell realms are these realms of constantly being in conflict and at odds with our environment, and there never being any relief. So at that point, then, we continually experience these paranoid, angry, and painful torments. We can say that these are just psychological experiences, but we can also say our human realm is just a psychological experience. There's no difference. The thing is, actually, in our human realm, there's some sense of transparency. But we also know when we're less human and more paranoid, there's a tremendous sense of solidity with regards to the problems with the world around us. So you could say, accordingly, also the experiences of the lower realms seem very solid. And yet at the same time, what creates these realms is this delusion. And that's what we presently are perfectly positioned to see through this delusion and to get rid of our habitual the habitual practices of this delusion. And that is then what we do through the path of Dharma. We need to see through the hoax that fixates on a self and which drives then the mechanisms of destructive emotions. And having seen through this, we then need to apply that vision and fully integrate it, which is then the practice of Dharma. 88. The Buddha's teaching is like the sun shining through clouds. People of Tingri, now is the one time it is present. The Buddha's teaching is not always manifest. we still have glimpses of the Dharma, like a gap in the clouds. We need to practice now. It cannot wait. As anything, the Buddha's teaching appears due to causes and conditions. So the Buddha's teaching are not eternally around. They're not eternally here. Right now, the favorable conditions are few, negative conditions are many. So again, we could say the teaching is at the verge of disappearing. And yet in our case, we still have glimpses. The sun might break through with moments of enlightened activity manifest in our perception. Yet once the night of the era of darkness sets in, then not even the name of Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha will be heard. Again, we cannot wait until we feel ready. If we are still in the confusion of samsara, it's because we either never encountered the Dharma, or else, having encountered the Dharma, we ignored it. Whatever the case is, presently now our chance is here. 89. You say such clever things to people, but don't apply them to yourself. People of Tingri, the faults within you are the ones to be exposed. Now, those who teach must have a stable experience of the Dharma. Exposing our own defects are essential to our practice. There is no negativity that cannot be purified. We need to have stable vigilance and stable application. So people may speak very beautifully about the Dharma, although the kleshas are still raging inside. Those who teach must first have a thorough grounding in the teaching. Kyabje Dilgo says, the steady flame of a stout wick can light 100 butter lamps, but the tenuous flame of a wick that is too thin cannot even keep itself alight. So, if someone has received teachings, yet not practicing them, is like someone dying of thirst next to the river. So to progress, one needs to be aware of one's own shortcomings. We need to check our mind, like looking in a mirror. To be conceited while seeing faults in others will just block any progress. The best teachings expose our faults, just like catching a thief puts an end to his mischief. We need a teacher that has the courage to do that. Polite teachers that only are interested in keeping a friendly atmosphere cannot help in that regard. We need to be aware of our defects and ready to neutralize them whenever they appear. We should actually be paranoid about these defects that we have, just like a ruler who fears assassin surrounds him or herself constantly with bodyguards. Rinpoche, he quotes the early Kadampa masters saying, I hold the sword of vigilance at the gate of my mind. When the emotions threaten, I threaten them back. Only when they relax their grip do I relax mine. End of quote. So without awareness of our own emotions, we might delude ourselves, thinking we are practicing the Dharma and end up with suffering despite the outer appearance of a practitioner. So, like Khyentse says, looking at the pictures of the Buddha realms or pictures of paradise is not quite the same as being there. Just reading the doctor's prescriptions will not cure us either. Rinpoche goes on to say, it is just as pointless to practice the Dharma without it penetrating your being. You will only be squandering your potential. No one can travel the path for you. You must do it yourself. Of course, you will not be able to eliminate all your faults at once. Only a Buddha is perfect. But you can purify yourself little by little, like the moon emerging resplendent from a sea of clouds. End of quote. We have in the life of the Buddha the story of Angulimala, who for various reasons, ended up believing that his practice was to kill people, and eventually also getting caught by the pattern of this activity cultivated tremendous negativity and hatred. But he met the Buddha, and we say that the Buddha pacified him, and Angulimala became the Buddha's student. And after fully acknowledging, exposing his crimes, Angulimala then managed to purify this all this negative karma and achieved realization. However, that kind of extraordinary circumstances is again something that we don't just sign up and everything's forgiven. This really requires deep faith and application, because without that, then no matter who we are, nothing happens. So benefiting others should be our first thought in the morning, and we sustain that throughout the day, checking again how we did at night before we go to sleep. And if we didn't quite, you could say, achieve our objective, we want to, you could say, rekindle that inspiration. We don't want to be defeated and say, I can't do it, but rather we restore our practice if we have then fallen short of what we wish to do. And if we do that, then we will continually make progress the way that Rinpoche describes it here. That faith succumbs to circumstance is only a short step away. That faith succumbs to circumstance is only a short step away. People of Tingri contemplate samsara's imperfections. So we want to realize that faith, as we have it right now, is impermanent. We have it right now, we should make use of it. But we should also, you could say, continually kindle such faith. Khyentse and Padampa often talks about inspiration disease. Other teachers talk about honeymoon and so forth that one might have when one encounters the Dharma or encounters the Guru. Now, such inspiration disease wears off. Sustain constant faith and determination to be free through contemplating 1. The qualities of the Dharma. 2. The qualities of the teacher. 3. The suffering of samsara. So we can easily be inspired then through the contact high we get in the presence of great teachers. But that actual point of what they are trying to teach us might well get lost due to our fickle motivation, the superficiality of our faith. We're just in love with the teacher, and we have this moment that Khyentse and Padampa refers to as inspiration disease. So this might very easily pass when we're no longer in the presence of the teacher. Or else sometimes even it lasts, then the novelty wears out. So that's where you could say Dharma has been compartmentalized. So we need to actually see the Dharma in our living experience with all circumstances. So that's where we need to sustain faith through contemplation on the validity and relevance of the teacher and its insight into reality, our reality. And also understanding then the liberation and the qualities of the teacher, such as wisdom and compassion. So remembering then the consequences of remaining confused and wandering samsara, Dilgo Khyentse says, and quoting the classical images, if you pooled all the tears you have shed in your past lives, they would form a vast ocean. If you piled up all the bodies you have had, even just the bodies from rebirths as insects, the heap would rise higher than the highest mountain. End of quote. So through such images, we want to generate revulsion and the determination to be free and enhance it with joy in the brilliance of the teaching and with also rejoicing in the immense qualities of the living teachers. So there's a question. just curious where the comments underneath the main sloka from the text are from. Yeah, the bullet point here, these are really just my reading of Dilgo Khyentse Rinpoche's commentary and highlighting then the important points in his commentary, and that then forms the basis for you could say my reading and sort of reiterating of Khyentse Rinpoche's commentary. So 91. Frequenting evil friends is bound to make your own behavior evil. People of Tingri, abandon all friendships that are negative. So this is not really that we want to escape the world and move into some sort of cult country, away from it all. It's just that we're very easily influenced. So being, you could say, realistic about how people influence us, we take that into consideration here. So we're influenced by our experiences. Our mind is like a crystal. If we associate with negative and aggressive persons, this influences us. Better keep a distance. So this is based on the, you could say, verifiable fact that our consciousness, in taking in constant impressions every micro moment, then reacts, fixates and reacts to these impressions. And as we solidify these impressions, these becoming, you could say, mental episodes that we then own, then regardless of their magnitude, they are then lodged on our ground consciousness. And this is what we then refer to as karmic impressions. So these are left on, you could say, the alaya, or the storehouse or ground consciousness. So we're a bit like a crystal. If you put a crystal on a blue piece of cloth, it turns blue, likewise on red, and so forth. So likewise, we're very much constructed in the, you could say, context of our interactions with others. In fact, this is basic to what we call social constructivism, that we actually don't have necessarily any solid identity, but rather we're constructed in our relationships. So we are naturally influenced and constructed by these circumstances, and that, of course, then includes being with people who have afflicted states of mind and aggressive dispositions. So in that, as Khyentse Rinpoche says, mind like a crystal is colored by its surroundings. He says, you're bound to reflect the qualities and shortcomings of the good or bad friends whose company you keep. If you associate with the malevolent, the selfish, the rancorous, the intolerant, the arrogant, then their faults will affect you. You should do better to keep your distance. So I think one by default actually does that, but there should be some sense of how we are very much conditioned by these circumstances. 92. Frequenting virtuous friends is bound to make your own good qualities arise. People of Tingri, follow your spiritual teachers. So then still, so conversely, the company of spiritual teachers have a beneficial influence. The company of scholars will make us learned, that of bodhisattvas will make us compassionate, and so forth. Like ordinary wood, next to sandalwood, we take on their fragrance. So this is still about the natural the way we naturally are influenced by conditions. And we can observe how being with wise and kind persons, and particularly spiritual teachers, is immensely beneficial. Kyabje Dilgo Khyentse says, these masters are like gardens of medicinal plants, sanctuaries of wisdom. In the presence of a realized master, you will rapidly attain enlightenment. Depending on whether we are, that was end of quote. So depending on whether we are with enlightened masters, bodhisattvas, scholars, meditator, their qualities will rub off on us, just as ordinary wood placed next to sandwood takes its scent. I'd like to say for us who don't necessarily live in a culture of sages and practitioners, it also applies that if we practice Guru Yoga, if we practice Buddha Anusmriti, the recollection of the Buddha, the recollection of the teacher, this achieves the same. And this is also why we have practices where we would visualize the teacher constantly in our heart or on the crown of our head and so forth. So we shouldn't think that just because we're living in a realm, it's a civilization that's a little bit low on the amount of sages, yogis, and people, sublime people with noble qualities. Just because we live under these circumstances, we actually have such examples in our world. As a matter of fact, I would, and this is off record, but I would argue that having all the media available, such as photographs, and such as recorded teachings, such as video, movies, and so forth, all of these available, we actually can see and receive blessings of great teachers. Just from seeing them, we get them. We get their teachings, but we also get the flavor of their persons through these, you can say, representations and images and so forth. So also in Tibet, you very often had persons who, there were monasteries where very often there weren't great teachers that necessarily came. I remember staying with Khyentse Rinpoche, the previous Khyentse Rinpoche in Tashijong, and one of his lamas there saying that he had many, Khyentse Rinpoche had many monasteries in Tibet. And in some of these monasteries, because there were many, and because Khyentse Rinpoche might have been busy elsewhere, some of these monasteries would only see him very rarely. So in this way, it's not just in Tibet or here that we need to actually be proactive in recalling the presence of the teachers. This also applies elsewhere in Buddhist cultures. Well, this should have said 93. Anyway, deception and lies deceive not only others, but yourself as well. People of Tingri, as witness, take your own conscience. So with the correct practice of Dharma, we become comfortable with who we are. That's a good thing. But this does not mean to be wholly righteous and the judge of others. We could be deeply undharmic, yet have a superficially perfect conduct. So Jetsun Milarepa, he famously said, quote, finding nothing with which to reproach ourselves is the sign of the purity of our vows, end of quote. Also, we often hear how the sign of a practitioner, a great practitioner at the verge of death, is that he or she will have no regret. So with good Dharma practice, we can become clean. We can be comfortable with who we are. When we know our own pure motivation, then we don't need to worry about what others might say. Also, we see in the Lojong practices where it says, of the two witnesses, hold the principal one, meaning our own consciousness, that we are witness to what we're thinking, what our motivations and attitudes are. So when we know that we did our best, then we need not worry. But as far as this being aware of what's going on, we should only be our own judge, not that of others. Khyentse Rinpoche says, only a Buddha knows others' deep motivation, end of quote. So we need to check to which extent we apply the Dharma ourselves. There's no need for us to be righteous, and as Rinpoche points out in detail, we could behave perfectly and yet not be living in accord with the Dharma. So delusion born from ignorance, this is 94. Delusion born from ignorance is the worst disaster-bearing demon. People of Tingri, hold fast to your vigilance and mindfulness. So all beings have Buddha nature, yet in their delusion they generate suffering. With the belief in a self, there are then kleshas and karma and the cycle of samsara. So the real troublemaker in our life is this ignorance. Now is the time to rid ourselves of this delusion. So every being has Buddha nature, yet oblivious to that, they suffer according to their ignorance and what comes from that, which is then thoughts, emotions, and the ensuing patterns of reaction. All of this comes from unawareness of our own true nature. Ignorance itself is this, you could say, blackout, initial moment of not seeing properly, and with that then taking cognition as self and positing, you could say, the space as other. And when we have that initial moment then, where we have a sense of self, then we also have this sense of solid phenomena out there. And this belief then leads to attraction and aversion, craving and repulsion, and hence our destructive emotions, they set in and create the realms and experiences of samsara. Originating in our mind, this delusional pattern haunts us with confusion and suffering, just like we were being haunted by some ghost or demon. Kyabje Dilgo refers to the way of the Bodhisattva, where Shantideva points out how all the hells are created by our own mind. Suffering is due to our own mind. And Rinpoche says, therefore, it is desire and hatred that we must oppose, and not our ordinary enemies, who are themselves the unhappy victims of their passions. Now, this understanding our enemies is a point that Shantideva then further expands in great length in his chapter on patience, the 6th chapter, also in the way of the Bodhisattva. And he points out ordinary enemies cannot harm us beyond this lifetime, whereas emotions, they hide in the core of our being, and they've harmed us and will continue harming us as long as we don't directly address this ignorance. So presently, with the help of the guidance of the spiritual teacher, we can do something about this and annihilate the demon of clinging to an I. And I'd just like to make a note that probably most of you realize that this sort of, how do you say, combative language that very often is used is entirely metaphorical. And I realize that some of us who grew up as pacifists, we might have some objection to this or perceive it sort of politically incorrect or something like that. But the fact is we're doing away with something, and we might do away with it through non-aggression and wisdom and so forth, but we could still describe this in terms of, you could say, you could say ignorance versus wisdom. There is some element in that. So on a practical level, we can say on the absolute level, then samsara is nirvana and all of that, but on a very immediate real level, yes, there's something that needs to be done. There's a problem. So 95. If you don't hold on to the 3 or 5 poisons, the path is near. People of Tingri, generate powerful antidotes against them. Fixating on a self, we end up with poisoned frames of mind. These drive terrible and tragic crimes and conflict, yet, if we look, they are baseless. We need to be determined to get to the bottom of the cause of our suffering. In doing that, we get to the root of all suffering, everywhere, without exception. So, like we described before, when we fixate on the self, then our mind is delusional and poisoned with all its aversions and attractions, all its patterning. And then with these, you could say, heavily ensconced attitudes, we have then the presence in our mind of primarily what we describe as the 5 poisons: desire, hatred, stupidity, jealousy, and pride. If you want a more contemporary and you could say psychological descriptions, you can and how this plays out just in terms of our experience and so on. You can look in Myth of Freedom, and you can look in a section in Myth of Freedom that's called Styles of Imprisonment. So, but the long and the short is that these poisoned states of mind, then kleshas, they drive people, ourselves, and also you could say the world at large. It drives them to commit crimes of hatred, greed, and it's also what drives all wars and conflicts. You could say in the entire sort of geopolitical context on a sort of macrocosmic level and in a microcosmic level, these poisoned grounds of our subjectivity, they operate within every moment of our existence, and yet they have no reality. This is what we saw earlier on. They are like storm clouds, very imposing from the outside, but entirely insubstantial in nature. The kleshas only have the power we give them, so we should get rid of them now, once and for all. And then liberation is sitting right here with us. We need determination to do this. Otherwise, the teacher's instructions are left as merely ideas. Now, the teacher cannot beam us up or save us. He can, however, show us the way, as we also saw in the quote from the Buddha when he was passing away. I have shown you the path, but liberation depends upon you. So, since emotions are persistent and powerful in terms of our delusion and the degree of our habituation to this delusion, we need powerful antidotes. Unless we get to the root of it, they will come back as branches on a tree where the root has been left intact, and these branches then might grow more vigorously than before. 96, and apologies if I go a little bit over time. If your perseverance has no strength, you will not reach Buddhahood. People of Tingri, make sure you don that armor. The lives of past masters are examples for us, not tales from an enchanted time gone by. We should practice with the great joy of diligence. Otherwise, we will be defeated by the habits of laziness. We don the armor of diligence and defeat the enemy of indolence. So if you look at the lives of the Buddha, including his previous lives as a bodhisattva, as well as the life of Milarepa and so on, we can see how practice requires great energy. Now, this kind of diligence should be joyful. Just like we catch on to something that's really great, we become very enthusiastic. So this we achieve through first certainty, understanding what we're doing, or we might just have, you could say, constant inspiration, and we might have constant faith. So that can help us to arrive at such certainty. Otherwise, applying reasoning, analysis, and so forth. But once we have that, then we put this into practice through meditation and acquiring then a taste for both meditation and the various practices of post-meditation practice, such as Lojong. Then we'll have this joy and continuous application. And this is what we call diligence, sometimes referred to as energy, sometimes referred to as vigor, sometimes as enthusiasm. It's a bit less fickle than enthusiasm. It is this, you could say, joy of really doing something wonderful. And it doesn't wear out. So not capable of that, if we're not capable of having this application, then we are like a king then, the aforementioned king under threat, or ruler under threat, without bodyguards. We're an easy target for laziness, and then the ultimate enemy, our kleshas, can easily get us. We're an easy target. The battle of liberation is easily lost. So hence, it's imperative that we don this armor of diligence, and we then defeat indolence, laziness, apathy. 97. Habitual tendencies. Being old acquaintances. Keep on coming back. People of Tingri. Don't go on following the past. As beginners, destructive habits are strong, while constructive habits are weak. The kind teacher has shown us our potential and how to train. Unless we follow through, we will be defeated. If we do follow through, we can defeat negative habits with calm and confidence. So as much as destructive habits are part of us, they are the exact part that creates our suffering. So we want to be clear on that. At the same time, something can be done. If we extract ourselves from habits, then we're free. This is tricky and treacherous, and it does require then the continued diligent cultivation of meditation and post-meditation practices. So while we are beginners, our newly found constructive habits are weak. Now, to deny that would be detrimental to proactively doing something about it. So there's no point for us to sort of live in denial about our neurosis. It's doable, so there's no point in actually being uncomfortable with the fact. So now, due to the extraordinary fortune where we have met a teacher, his or her, and with his or her, due to his or her kindness, then the buds of faith, trust in the nature of the path have begun to sprout. Again, these buds, they're vulnerable. Like Rinpoche describes something a bit like a sort of a neophyte battling with an experienced samurai. So if we continue as before, just, you could say, habitually plodding along, then we will be defeated. So we need to be really clear on how we can apply our practice. If we are defeated by habitual patterns, then we're like this person again with an earlier image who leaves the treasure island, this El Dorado, empty-handed. Or Rinpoche gives the example of someone selling off a priceless heirloom cheaply and then going bankrupt. So only through constant practice will one achieve the proficiency to calmly face and defeat negative tendencies. If your understanding, this is 98, if your understanding and realization are weak, pray to your Lord Teacher, people of Tingri, and deep meditation will be born in you. So when we have obstacles, we need to invoke the Teacher's presence. Progress is contingent on the inspiration of a living person. The Teacher's presence, melting our hardness, is blessing. This blessing is contingent on devotion. So when we perceive our practice as weak, we should not give up. Rather, we should pray to the teacher. Again, in a modern context, we should realize that praying to the teacher is not theism. It's also not assuming there is some mystical entity that can salvage us. But rather, what we're invoking with prayer is the nature of reality, our Buddha nature, and its all-pervasive presence. So deep yearning devotion is indispensable as the sole panacea on the path. And these dark moments of the soul, they're dispelled when we invoke the presence of the teacher. What happens then is the frozen, rigid quality of our perceived problems melt away. And as we gain confidence in their transparency, these obstacles turn into accomplishment. So this is due to the meeting of devotion and blessing. And we see in the lives of those before us, in the lineage, what a role devotion played. Khyentse Rinpoche would tell the story of how one disciple of Gampopa, he attained the first bhumi just arriving at the mountain path, where one could see Gampopa's residence, and he then did prostrations there. So this place where we have devotion is something that is like a sun that breaks through the ordinary, rigid darkness of our habitual patterns. It's like this crack where light gets through. So this is something that melts our ordinary dense confusion. So we very often talk about the hook of the teacher's compassion and blessing and the ring of the student's devotion. The blessing is contingent on devotion. So if you aspire to happiness in the future, accept your present trials. This is Sloka 99. People of Tingri, then Buddhahood is right here, just beside you. With a vision of the objective of the path, we should be courageous regardless the circumstances. We should not waste this opportunity. With certainty in the view and practice, Buddhahood is not far off. We should invest we should invest our natural inheritance wisely. So with courage about the present challenges and discomforts, we need to recognize that we are creating the conditions for the bliss of liberation through the practice of Dharma. To ignore future lives will result in the waste of a tremendous opportunity. With understanding and the perspective of future lives, we'll be able to reprioritize and focus on what is essential. We can see this in the lives of the sages of the past. So I always like to say, coming from a modern perspective, as Westerners, something like rebirth is a quite unknown idea. So we need to be clear on how, in the first place, our Western belief system originated this discourse on physicalism, material scientism. And we need to actually see its problematic premises and its inconclusive nature, the inconclusive understanding around consciousness that we have in Western science, the hard problem. We then need to look at the Buddhist science of mind, which is the premise of the Dharma, and understand its arguments basic to the idea of karma, reincarnation, samsara, and so forth. And finally, we can actually look at substantial, both contemporary research and also traditional narratives and recollections of individuals who remember their past lives. So once we have that, then our perspective will change. Otherwise, we can, of course, simply trust. But sometimes skepticism paves the way for a wider understanding and actual confidence and faith. So being initially skeptical, we could very well arrive at a great degree of trust in this perspective of reincarnation. So then practicing with a recognition of the value of what we're doing, Buddhahood is not far off. Khyentse says, if you are sincerely devoted to achieving it, Buddhahood is not far off. It is within you. It is here and now. The primordial present, the primordial freshness of the present instant. It is the innate quality of each and every being. End of quote. So we possess an inherent natural wealth of Buddha nature, and it is up to us to invest it wisely and make the fortune that it is its natural potential. Number 100. This old Indian master will not stay in Tingri, he will go away. People of Tingri, it is now that you must clarify your doubts. At death, the teacher's main concern is the students. Not an ordinary person. The teacher's actions are driven by compassion. The teacher teaches impermanence through his or her death. So if we look at the lives of great masters, we can see that they're unconcerned about death. And they're more concerned about that, that the students are clear on what they're supposed to do. So Khyentse says, Padampa, the old Indian acharya, warned his disciples that his days were numbered. You too should profit from the ephemeral meeting of teacher and disciple to receive instruction and clear away your doubts. End of quote. So an acharya then is an Indian term for a master. And this is someone that, a Buddhist master in general, is someone we could see as what we call a niyamanakaya, a manifestation of enlightenment, manifesting to show us the way. And that's what we mean with the Tibetan title Tulku. It's someone whose birth is not driven by ignorance, but by compassion. So the teacher is continually driven by this compassion, which is founded on wisdom, and hence also is not caught up in destructive emotions and patterns. And hence, we actually don't see the passing of a teacher as something that has to do with him or her, as much as it's another teaching, namely the teaching on impermanence. So, 101. I myself have practiced without distraction. People of Tingri, you too should follow my example. So Padampa Sangye could die with no regret. His life is to be taken as an example. We should make aspirations according to his teaching. So as we saw in the story then, some of you might have read the story I sent to everyone at the beginning of the course with the meeting with Milarepa. Anyway, sitting up in the Dropbox. But as we can see there, Padampa Sangye was no ordinary person. He was an accomplished master of the highest degree, a living Buddha. So with his realization, he was able to benefit countless others. So these 100 verses of advice reflect his wisdom and his compassionate caring for others. And Kyabje Dilgo Khyentse says, if you are seeking spiritual transformation, take the lives of the realized beings of the past as your model. If you follow the example of Padampa Sangye, there is no doubt you can attain his level of realization. It all depends on your efforts. Make that aspiration fill your mind. So this is really the end of our study of these pith instructions, these upadeshas. And I hope this is something that the Tibetans will always say, this is something that you will keep by your pillow, something that's useful to you. And even though the presenter here is not really qualified because I can read English, not always that well, and have been exposed to some of the teaching here and had the fortune to meet Khyentse, and I thought to say a few things about this. It meaning a lot to myself. I hope it's also something that is useful to you. So I'd like to thank you all for your participation in this, and I beg your, how do you say, I apologize for going a little bit over time here, and also I don't know if you can hear somebody outside the window hosing down something. Anyway, it's been really truly delightful to undertake this study, and I'll just check if there's any questions just before we end. So I guess not. So again, the simplicity of this is, you could say, somewhat deceptive. Then again, those of you who are familiar with the teachings will know that there are teachings here that are known as Buddha in the palm of your hand. So I hope with invoking the presence of your teachers that these teachings will be able to penetrate confusion and that confusion may dawn as wisdom. So thank you very much for participating, and we'll conclude with dedication here. By this merit, may all attain omniscience, may defeat the enemy wrongdoing, from the stormy waves of birth, old age, sickness, and death, from the ocean of samsara, may all beings be freed. May bodhicitta, precious and sublime, arise where it has not yet come to be, and where it has arisen, may it never fail, but grow and flourish ever more and more.